a bunch of topics that I want to cover today. So starting with permission to sign up. It is literally around the corner. So as I understand it, we're probably less than a week from permission to sign up. So to talk about maybe where we are right now and what we should expect in the next couple of weeks.
Sure. So today we're still in a gated sign up phase. Contracts are in OP mainnet. Hubs are open source. Anyone can download, spin one up, sync with the whole network. So everything is working other than signups. So kind of once you're in to Farcaster with a an invite, you're able to do everything in a permissionless way. But today, the only way to onboard is through Warpcast. And so as of, we're tracking for it, but next Wednesday, we should be able to flip the switch where, trusted signups is off. The contract itself is actually not upgradable. So we're approaching it from a once things are permissionless, the only way actually to kind of make a change would be to drive social consensus from people running hubs and app developers to kind of switch
Hmm.
the canonical contracts at the hub level. So there is an ability if there was some catastrophic mistake to move quickly, but I think we're moving into a mode where the primitives on chain will run forever as programmed, starting Wednesday, which is actually pretty exciting because this has been,
It
Vernon
is.
and I have been
Yeah.
working on Farcaster for 3 years this October. So to kind of go from idea to
Hmm.
finally having what we think of as a, you can call it Farcaster V3 relative to the versions we've had, but I mean, it's like the first public version, right? So this is the official, out of beta, so to speak.
So after the switch is turned on, the minimum cost to get on the Farcaster network is $7, right? So that's the price per unit. So you have to pay at least $7 to get on the network.
Yeah, so let's just kind of walk through what's being
Hmm.
paid and who's that going to. Um, so in a perfect world, we could just allow anyone to sign up, right? Like, why charge? Maximize growth. Um, the reality of that situation would be you would have um, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of programmatic accounts get created. And I'll give you a very clear example. Noster has millions of accounts created, right? Pub keys that have broadcast messages onto that decentralized messaging protocol. But
Hmm.
the kind of architecture of Farcaster is similar to that of a blockchain, right? In that it isn't, doesn't need cryptocurrency and is not a blockchain, but the idea is that there's global state on a server, right? So a hub is like an
Yeah.
Ethereum node or a Bitcoin node in that the entirety of Farcaster, the canonical version of Farcaster, the network, lives within a single hub. And so in a world where you don't have any cost, you will be overrun with spam. I wish spam didn't exist, but it does. So in a world where you want global state on a server for the architecture of the network, because there are other versions of designing a decentralized social network. You could take a federated approach like Mastodon or Blue Sky does, right? And I think it's a little outside the scope. We're far down the path of we think global state is really great from a developer experience in the same way that blockchains are great from a developer experience. It's like you have full access to the global state, data and APIs in a single kind of server. So in that world, we have to have
Hmm.
some amount of rationing of the limited amount of storage space that a hub will exist. And so in that way, I think you have a couple of levers that you can pull. One is you can make each sign up have some amount of cost. So people who are motivated to use the network will pay the cost, and spammers are less likely to want to, pay that cost. Or you can lower the amount of activity for sign up, right? So it's like $7. We're giving kind of like a base level of activity, but you could imagine an iteration in the future where we say, you know what, actually the average person who signs up, they only need 100 reactions, 100 follows, and 100 posts or something, something like that. And we can offer a much cheaper onboarding. I think where we optimize for with this kind of initial release is do something pretty straightforward and simple. Um, have it high enough that you have a lot of spammers, you have a lot of airdrop farmers, don't have it too cheap that now all of a sudden the network gets overwhelmed with them. And if it's too expensive, we've already built it in so that every 6 weeks we are actually reevaluating pricing at the protocol level, right? It's going to actually be built into the way hubs upgrade. Hubs upgrade every 6 weeks. We actually took that from Rust. And so our view is let's run the 6 week experiment at $7. It's interesting because if you flip to one side of like, oh, well, the average social media user probably thinks that's expensive, but arguably maybe you say the average spammer or airdrop farmer might think $7 is cheap. So I think we're in this kind of weird situation where we may be pricing out kind of like a potential user who's good, while at the same time still having plenty of spammers and airdrop farmers. But I think part of that is the only way to figure that out is to actually just run the experiment live. And so that's what we're planning to do. The one thing is we do have an increasing price schedule. So for whatever reason, things are really popular. Prices actually, after the first so many kind of signups during that 6 week period, signups double in price to 14. Then I think it goes to $21, $28. So it just kind of incrementally increases so that we don't have the kind of overwhelming number of spammers all signing up at $7. Like there's a little bit of a throttle by increasing the cost.
And just to be clear, you said that the contract is not upgradable, but the cost itself it can be dynamic, right? So what you're talking about is just changing the specific pricing of the storage unit, but the contract itself cannot be changed. Is my understanding correct?
Yeah, I should double confirm on the storage contract relative to the FID contract because they're two separate contracts. But you can kind of think of the FID as actually the most important because that is it's essentially the identity, right? It's the mapping between the FID, which is your representation on the Farcaster network. You as a user see a username, but the hubs see and the clients see an FID, which is just an integer, right? Like Varun is FID2, I'm FID3. And then that mapping between an FID and an Ethereum address, that is the most important thing for the network in terms of you actually now can identify everyone in the network on hubs by using the FID contract. The storage contract is actually just a guidance mechanisms to hubs to say how much space should I allocate to this FID. But you can kind of think of FID as the root, and then storage is kind of a layer on top of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And at this moment, if you want to get on Farcaster protocol, you have to pay for storage, right? And the assumption behind that is there's always a limited amount of storage. So you have to pay, you cannot get it for free, right? So this is just the assumption that we're operating in.
Yeah, and to be clear, it's just a call to that contract. So you could go register as many FIDs as you want, but if you don't pay for storage for the FID, the CAS won't appear on hubs.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah. So a related question to that is, so how are we thinking about spam prevention? I know we've talked about, the spam in the past dev cost, many times, but just talking about the next 2 weeks, if let's say there are some spammy accounts coming to the protocol, as users, what we can do is just report them, and then you're going to do a moderation on the webcast level. Is it what's going to happen?
Yeah, I think that the simplest starting. Can you still hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, so the simplest version is we've already put into place some amount of spam control on Warpcast now. And I think it's worth delineating. So Warpcast, just like an email client, can have its own set of spam and moderation, and the protocol is unaffected, right? So this is a strictly client level thing. Our point of view has kind of changed a few times on this, but I think our primary mechanism is we're going to put this $7 fee in. And so I don't think you're going to get a million accounts signing up, right? I think you're going to get to a place where you probably have a few thousand if I was to guess, but maybe it's lower. Who knows? Like part of this is like we have to just run the experiment next week and see kind of what the market demand is. Mm-hmm. If I was to guess based on the 270,000, almost 300,000 people who connected an Ethereum address and a Twitter account, and then, in some cases, non-zero ETH balance to the waitlist form, I have a hunch that we will get some amount of kind of signups. And I think for us, it's we just kind of want to see the shape of that. And I think building systems ahead of time without knowing the actual shape of the problem is kind of like actually a waste of engineering effort. And so we have kind of some base level systems in place that are pretty basic. And I think what we've already allocated is next week, everyone kind of going to be online and paying attention. And as we see kind of user feedback on both, it's really nice on Warpcast is like people can immediately start sharing that feedback as well as like private feedback.
Mm-hmm.
We can start taking action. And I think there are different types of spam, right? So spam that, for example, would end up on the trending feed. That is a very Warpcast specific thing versus reply spam versus direct cast spam
Mm-hmm.
versus, channel spam. And so I think we want to get a handle on where the issue is and then be able to just very quickly solve for that. And then actually knowing what the shape of that is, figure out it's like how can we actually best help the overall protocol with this. But I think we went pencil to paper like probably 6 weeks ago to be like, okay, how do we deal with this? And we realized that like we actually don't even have a good hypothesis on where the spam will be if it even exists. Or do you have a bunch of people sign up and they don't do anything because they're kind of waiting their time? So I think we didn't want to like prematurely optimize and instead just kind of going in with like a very honest and transparent approach of we're going to be reactive to this and we're going to be pretty quick to react,
Mm-hmm.
assuming it's
Yeah.
a problem. If it's not a problem, great. We saved a bunch of time in terms of engineering effort that can go otherwise go to growing protocol DAO. So that's how we're approaching it.
Yeah, yeah. And then switching gears a bit, I remember we talked about sort of the priority after permission to sign up for the webcast team is to focus on what do you call it, the quality DAO. So to talk about sort of how are you going to increase the quality in DAU, and then how would you define quality DAU?
Yeah, so I think quality DAU, rough proxy of this is the active badge. It's not perfect. There are definitely some what I would consider low quality or spammy accounts that have the active badge, and I think we're going to have to iterate that because in a world where you have permissionless signups, that can be easily gamed. So I think we'll continue to tweak that score and how that's calculated. And for those who aren't familiar, the active badge requires you to have a filled out profile, um, which just kind of puts a little bit of effort into making sure that you've kind of done all the basic things. And then it's a combination of that and then a simple scoring metric of how many casts that you've done, the kind of like denominator, and then the numerator is how much inbound engagement do you get. So combination of likes, replies, and recasts. And so if that score is above one, you're kind of like you can, if you want to think about it like from a liquidity standpoint, you're a market maker in the sense that you're actually adding liquidity to
Yeah.
the protocol versus a person who's doing a lot of casting but not getting a lot of engagement is actually from people's time standpoint is actually taking away time. So it's not perfect. I'm sure a ton of edge cases that you could come up with that were like, oh, here's a good account that actually is below one. But overall, like this is something I'm eyeballing all the time. It's like the good users on Farcaster and good defined by like my taste of good, which is what kind of has been the last 3 years, roughly correlate to the active badge. And like I said, we're going to have to iterate on that. But basically, that's like kind of the loose target is like how can we 10, 100x, 1000x the number of people on Farcaster who kind of fit the profile of like if you were to average all the people with the active badge today, that average composite person, how can we get 1000x more people like that using the
Yeah.
protocol every day?
Good. And now moving on to channels. So actually, a lot has happened in channels since the last time we talked, which was just 2 weeks ago. Now channel statistics has been introduced, and sort of the channel mods have been sort of working in their channels for a while now, and we have seen that the number one channel, at least by engagement, is the memes channel. And Johnny, I believe, has done a lot of work to drive engagement in the memes channel. So it seems like it's working pretty well. But just talk about sort of in the past 2 weeks, what's your observation on channels and how are the channel mods doing so far?
Yeah, so it's worth calling out is we've actually given no additional features to the leads. Like literally just we put their name on the top of the channel on web. It's like the only place you can find that. And we gave them a stats page so they can kind of get a better sense of how they're doing. But that's it. Like we haven't actually put any engineering effort in. I think up front I was originally kind of planning to tie it to a bunch of different little improvements. And what I quickly realized with the leads is actually just having the leads there and then kind of checking in with them. So I have a Telegram group with the folks, and it's every single channel with a lead has basically increased, which has been great over the last couple of weeks. And so increase from a total engagement standpoint. And I think I'm starting to crystallize 2 weeks in, like the set of
Hmm.
features that we're going to help leads. And then I think in a world where we have permissionless channels, if you're a channel creator, right, it's like, oh, I'm passionate about this topic. I want to create this channel. This leads experiment over the next, we're going to do about 4 more weeks of this version of leads. Um, and I think from this, we're hopefully going to have a base set of features that we can both provide in Warpcast so that you can easily start a channel and then actually grow it, which I think is an important uh, part of our product strategy for both Warpcast, but also for the protocol in a way of like having a social primitive that is differentiated. But I think that the second component is in doing this experiment in a centralized way and iterating, we can get to a place of okay, what are some of the things that actually should be encoded at the protocol level, both on a kind of hub level, but even potentially even a new on-chain primitive that is kind of within the universe of contracts for Farcaster, because you can imagine that like maybe the right version of channels is in order to create a channel, you actually deploy a contract. So there's a little bit more friction there. Maybe you have to pay the protocol a fee to do that. So again, you reduce the amount of spam. But in doing so, you actually create a primitive that is even more composable and more portable outside of even just Farcaster, right? So let's say you were really passionate about F1 racing and you end up building a channel on Farcaster that is like the premier feed on the internet, better than a subreddit, better than Twitter, better than anything else for fans of F1 racing. The ability for you to actually have that encoded on a blockchain in a way that you could potentially port it to other not only other clients within Farcaster, but even other protocols, assuming Farcaster wasn't doing what you wanted it to. I think that's a really powerful idea, and I think that this is something I casted the other day. Is um, once we're permissionless, I actually wouldn't be surprised that within the first couple of months, if someone tries to fork the Farcaster network and says, "Hey, Warpcast team, thanks for doing all this open source work. I think you guys are making the wrong set of optimizations. I think the price is too high. I think channels is not the right way to go, and I think you should just be going all in on video. And I actually don't want to deal with any of your decisions as the kind of like core group working on the protocol. And you just fork everything. New set of contracts, new set of hubs. You change the network that they point at, and now you can use something like OpenCast or any of some of these open source clients that people have built on Farcaster, and you can literally just have a competing protocol. And I think that's completely fine. In the same way that I think the EVM's proliferation it was net beneficial to Ethereum, I think the same thing is like if the architecture that powers Farcaster today ends up being adopted by other social networks that point to different blockchains and or make different sets of decisions, I think that competition is extremely good. It's going to force what I would call the OG Farcaster implementation, or the one we're talking about,
Hmm.
to be competitive and always be focused on what do users want. And so that's where I kind of think about a lot of this stuff is we're on the verge of having this happen. And then I think the same thing is I want to ensure that channels as a way to attract people, potentially even from outside of crypto, that if you make a big investment in growing a community within the Farcaster protocol, you always have exit within clients as well as exit from the protocol itself.
Yeah. And just to clarify, in terms of webcast channels, your plan is still to keep it moderated at least in the next couple of months. So like permissionless channel creation is not going to happen until next year. Is it still the plan?
I think that's the plan. I think look, we're a startup looking for product market fit, and so if 2 weeks from now or 4 weeks from now, towards the end of the channel lead experiment, the clear answer is okay. Actually, here's a basic set of tools. Actually, having a dedicated lead or kind of another group of people who could potentially be helping, that is sufficient actually to see decent growth within channels. Maybe our point of view is, hey, we should pull up permissionless channel creation, and maybe the way we do permissionless channel creation is we start within Warpcast, so we don't have to deal with a bunch of this on-chain stuff. We don't have to do an FIP. We get it in a way that we know we want to land this in a decentralized primitive way, but in doing so, we can just move a lot faster and actually give people what they want, right? Because I think people are clamoring to say, yeah, Dan, that's fine that you say what channel should we add this week. But what I actually want to do is I want to scratch an itch for a weird community that I have, and I want to feel empowered to be able to bring those people into the Farcaster protocol. And so I
Yeah,
think permissionless channel creation makes less sense in a world where the network is gated. But once we're permissionless, the longer we have permission channels, we're just holding back, I think, the growth of the network, assuming we believe channels is a great way to grow the network. So I think we have every incentive to get it to permissionless as soon as possible. But I want to just set clear expectations that like it's not like 2 weeks away. But that said, like if January is the right time, great. But if we pull it forward because we think it's best for the protocol, that's also great.
yeah, 100%. I want to be conscious of the time, so I want to
Yeah, I
talk
have 5 more minutes.
about. Okay, yeah. Okay. So passkey. So this is a feature, that is very new, only available on iOS 17 plus, I believe, right? So talk about what this is going to unlock on for the protocol, and then sort of what is the plan to roll out to, I don't know, Android or to basically bring it to more users.
Yeah, so I think at this point, iOS 17 has like over greater than 50% adoption on at least the Warpcast user base. And looking at last year's adoption cycle, I think within a month it'll be like 80, 90%. So basically 70% of usage for Farcaster or Warpcast is mobile, and 70% of mobile is iOS. So from a like if I was to fast forward by the end of the year, you're basically call it 50% of the user base, if I did my math right, um, is at least for Warpcast is on passkeys. And I think there are going to be some edge cases of people saying, "Hey, like I don't want to use passkeys," but the reality is like one, the threat model that you're worried about in passkeys, like there's a simpler threat model is that like Warpcast gets compromised and like the app, like we ship some change, we don't do it, but a nefarious person slides something in and then is able to grab it. So I actually think people aren't reasoning from first principles there. But that said, like there are always going to be some people who don't like being forced to do anything. But I think for the vast majority of users, especially more normal users and the 1000x quality DAO that we're trying to shoot for, just never having to see a mnemonic is a vastly superior user experience. And the other thing that I think is important, and I should share this on Farcast, I'll probably cast this out after this. We've actually done
Mhm.
87 on-chain recoveries. I just looked at the number earlier today, through Warpcast. So this is now people who had otherwise churned from the protocol, had lost their seed phrase, and now because in kind of the OP mainnet implementation of the contracts, anyone on Warpcast had their recovery address actually set this time. In this case, Warpcast is the maintainer of that, and we have an internal system that you kind of go through a 2FA, and then basically you are able to. Actually, it's not 2FA today. Let me be clear. It's email authentication, and we have plans to add 2FA.
Mhm.
But the other thing is, you as a user can change that if you don't trust us. I think generally we try to do things that are pro user. But what's nice is those are 287 people who had onboarded to the protocol, have a year for free. That prior to this on-chain recovery and even passkeys would have just been churned, and it's like it's essentially on-chain password reset. So I think that that's more important, if anything. It's like passkeys is great so that you never even have to get to that step. But I think in
Mhm.
terms of applying to all users across all clients, the on-chain recovery system is actually really crucial to ensuring that you don't churn uh, quality DAO from the protocol as a result of losing their seed phrase. And I would estimate, if I was to guess, somewhere between 10, if not even 15% of everyone who's ever onboarded to Farcaster, the reason they stopped using the product is actually because they lost their seed phrase. And so solving that with a 1-2 punch of do it up front with the first line of defense on passkeys, and then have a backup where you can do an on-chain recovery, I think is really important for compounding protocol DAO. And it's actually approaching an on-chain system with the goal of trying to have it have parity towards like Web 2 level UX.
Yeah. And and then lastly, I want to briefly touch on the signer. There's been some discussions around, paying 99 cents could potentially sort of reduce the conversion rate of users that are trying to sign up for, alt clients. I know that you've had some, interactions with other folks who are asking about this, but can you just comment on sort of how would you respond to this type of question, and how is FC Signer different from sign in with Farcaster, which I believe is coming soon.
Yeah, so let me address the second point first. That is confusing in naming, and I actually talked with Horsefaxon, who's the kind of like lead on-chain developer for the team, and Varun today, and I think that they're going to potentially have something for the next dev meeting around just better naming, because signers are an on-chain
Yeah.
primitive. They are actually they cost some gas. That's it. And what's powerful about them as a developer is if you do get a signer, you actually have a sovereign relationship with the user. You don't have to worry about Warpcast or another app cutting you
Yeah.
off, right? Obviously, there's friction in creating that because there's that on-chain transaction. Um, the sign-in with Farcaster is actually just more lightweight, and we it's actually more like signing with Ethereum. And so I think getting those namings right, because signing with Farcaster is off chain, it doesn't cost any money. It's just a EIP 712 signature, basically. Um, so what we need to get to is one, that needs to ship, which is I think going to ship soon. Two, we need to educate people, right? It's like here's a good example, and this is not criticism because part of it is like we changed it within Warpcast. But I had got a new phone. I was downloading Abura before this. I had to add a new signer for Abura, but I think you already had a signer on my behalf. And so, in a world where actually this sign in with Farcaster works, that's off chain, you would have just been able to do that, no problem. I would have been able to auth in, and
Hmm.
everything would have been great. So that's on Warpcast and the protocol folks to like really drive to actually make that really clean, have good tutorials, good documentation, and make that work. Okay. The the rationale for the in-app purchase on the signer is Warpcast actually needs to get to a every single
I
thing that you
think.
do that has anything to do with on-chain version of Farcaster will have an in-app purchase. And that's actually a point of view I've had actually, and we're in similar for like a decade, having been at Coinbase. And I always think that all crypto consumer apps that say, okay, great, fund your wallet, like totally broken experience. And the other thing you have to consider is if 70% of usage is on mobile, you have to play by the App Store rules. And I don't think PWAs for apps that you expect to spend a lot of time in per day have the level of performance necessary to be like
Yeah.
a DAO type app. PWAs, I think, work really well if you have higher ticket and there's actually a lot of financial incentive. So you're willing to deal with the performance stuff. But I think in terms of like actually, if you want an app that can compete with Instagram, it has to be native. Okay. And so in a world where you have native, you have to actually follow App Store rules. You can't say, great, if in order for you to sign up, you can send in some crypto. Apple just won't allow that. And so um, we wanted to get a base level where every user can sign up. They don't have to see a passkey or a backup mnemonic because we have passkeys now. And then they get presented with a sign up and pay with dollars in app purchase.
Hmm.
And I think crypto people aren't used to this because obviously they're used to crypto. I think I also have another theory that 99 cents feels like a lot because I actually think when people do on chain transactions, they don't even really pay attention to the cost for the most part.
Yeah.
It's like kind of fake money or they do a big discount on it. But the reality is 99 cents is not that much. But I get it. I'm like also, I can put myself in the other shoes and it's like, okay, you want to do as a developer anything you can to actually grow your app. And so adding people to pay before they sign up is a non starter. I push back a little bit on that. Is like obviously there are plenty of apps in the App Store that actually are paid and do well. I think that if you're gunning for like a venture scale app and venture scale growth, I would agree that you don't want to charge up front. So I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a couple of things. So one, I know Nanar is actually working on this kind of like shared signer
Yeah.
approach, so that it's
Yeah.
kind of like you onboard once and then you're able to just use that. And so that's nice because an app developer who says, hey, I don't need the sovereign key, I'm willing to actually use Nanar's shared key and be at the terms of service of Nanar, which is a developer centric company, right? Like, so that should be fine. That's great. That's the market actually solving for this. And now the market is more resilient because now you have an alternative to Warpcast to actually go and do this. I think the second thing is I would like to get to a place after we've covered the base that 100% of people on iOS, because everyone on iOS has to have a payment method, I know if you have an iOS device,
Hmm.
you can actually use this. Like that's actually a strong guarantee. Um, And so there is no exception. Like Apple does not allow you to download a free app if you don't have a valid payment method. So my view is I now know 100% of iOS users on who use Warpcast in a permissionless world never see a backup mnemonic and they never need any crypto. Then I think it's the place to start iterating from there. It's like, how do you build this improved user experience? So you can imagine a world where, because every Warpcast user is a wallet, you could actually pre-fund your wallet outside of the app if you're a more advanced user or something like that. And now we can actually just deduct that right from your balance, because what's technically happening is Apple, we're not doing a purchase, right? Because like you already had a balance. And this is the same case where you can't sign up for Netflix on an iPhone, but you can bring your Netflix account.
I think you're cutting off a bit.
Says, okay, if you want to actually request a signer from a user, given that all apps now have an FID, if your FID funds some balance with Warpcast, we'll just like draw down for you so that you can basically say, oh, the person doesn't have to do an on-chain in-app purchase. They basically get it sponsored by, Abora or any app, and then that app is responsible for figuring out which customers they want to qualify for sign up. And if you're a venture-backed company, maybe you say, hey, I'm willing to pay the 20 cents for everybody who signs up. Um, so I think that there are like a bunch of ways to solve this, but I think that the approach that I think we've generally always tried to optimize for is solve for the most end users in the simplest way possible first, and then iterate to make it more crypto native, and or also have like little polish items, or kind of the ability to sponsor, etc. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. So this has been fantastic. And before we wrap up, any last words that you want to say?
Yeah, and I'm gonna make sure. Please let me know as soon as this is ready from a recording, because I'd love to just put this out on Warpcast as like weekend listening, because we can talk through all the stuff that's coming up next week. Because I think sometimes voice is actually a much more human way of doing it, and I realize sometimes if I'm trying to clear out all of my mentions, I can come across as curt, or and that's why I try to add the smiley face, because I'm trying to do it from a place of like, no, I'm genuinely trying to kind of explain. But I do think that the feedback is welcome. I pay attention to everything, so every single response I read, and so I think it's important that people vocalize what they believe. But I also think that the thing I would push people on is I'm going to push back if I think that there's a reasonable trade-off we are making, and I want to articulate that. And I can always do a better job, and and make sure people feel heard. But I think there's important to say, I think all of these systems as we design them, especially as they are decentralized and protocol based, and you start to get less and less control over them, fundamentally rely on trade-offs. And I think the thing that people I would encourage is just to try to put themselves in our shoes of saying, like, what trade-offs are they making? And whether you agree with those trade-offs, fine. But I think sometimes it's like, make sure you try to actually, steel man the case, because it's not like we're just doing stuff willy-nilly. Like, we really try to put a lot of thought into it,
Yeah,
because ultimately, like, the effort we're putting in at the protocol level at Warpcast is in an effort to grow protocol DAO significantly from here, right? And so it's like, there is no version of product market fit within the Warpcast team. Like, our view is like, we need to be 1,000x the size from a DAO standpoint before we even start to get like level of like, okay, this is actually working, and like we have a real thing here. Like, we've built something that's like, it works, and a wonderful community of people who are using it, and we're extremely appreciative. But like, we can't miss the forest for the trees here of like, we have to get 1,000x growth for the protocol. And if that happens, here's the thing I would say: if your conversion rate stinks because of the 99-cent app or fee, but there are 1,000x more daily active users in the protocol, that's still a much bigger business for you as an app developer than if we do a bunch of polishing right now and we're only able to get 2x or 10x from where we are.
one and share it on Farcaster. So thank you so
Cool. One
much.
other
Yeah,
suggestion you might consider
go.
doing is just actually putting together a podcast. Because if we do these on, every 2 or 3 weeks, I'm happy to kind of hop on and just talk. If you put it on like it's like you can name the show or whatever, but if you just put it on like the Apple Store or whatever, people can also then subscribe to it in their podcast players.
Yeah, we should do that. Now it's on YouTube, but I need to put it on Apple Podcasts as well. Yep. Thanks for the suggestion.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot. Yep. All right.
Yeah.
Maybe
Bye.
see you in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. Bye.